right, last week our letter was the letter ayin, which is the I or understanding that I talked about earlier today. But today, was it up? All right, we're going to look at the letter pay. Say pay. Pay. Takes the ellipse to say pay. Pay is the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Its numerical value is 80. Just like in Roman numerals, every letter's a number. Well, it's the same thing with Hebrew. It's the same thing with Greek. But the letter Pe is the 17th letter with a numerical value of 80. And you're going to see these two-letter P's here. One has the dot in it and one doesn't. That's because sometimes it has the P sound and sometimes it has an F sound, like philosophy begins with a P, but it's an F sound. You following me? All right, but this is one of those letters that also has different endings that we're going to look at. But to help you remember, the letter Pei is a mouth. Let's put an eyeball in there. Do you see that? Here, let's add some lips. Let's put on an ear and a nose. Let's give him a chin. All right, so when you see the letter Pe, okay, we think of a mouth. But here's the other one, but here's the other ending. Sometimes the tail comes down. Just like we capitalize a letter B if it's at the beginning of a word versus a small b, or the beginning of a sentence, the letter pay or fey, which is the P or F sound, also changes shape when it's the last letter of a Hebrew word. And so what the sages teach concerning the letter pay, when it's not at the first, it means to be silent, your mouth is shut. But when the pay is down, it refers to an open mouth, and you're speaking. Okay, so let's see. In the Hebrew alphabet, we just saw the letter pay is the word for mouth, and it follows the letter ayin, which means to see, to know, to understand. And like I said in the service, this teaches that we must have understanding before we speak. That's why it's that way in the Hebrew language. If you remember in Exodus 13:9, which is part of our Torah portion, I believe, it says, it'll be a sign for you upon your hand, a memorial between your what? That's ayin, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. Isn't that interesting? That the Lord's law may be in your mouth. But what I want to talk about too here, let me show you this. You'll notice the 14th, we've covered the letter Nun, the letter Samech, the letter Ayin last week. This week is Pei, the 17th letter, and next week is the 18th letter, the Sadeh. But the Ayin represents what? The eye. And the Pei represents the mouth. Okay, I'm going to tell you an anomaly in the book of Lamentations that you do not know unless you know Hebrew. The book of Lamentations, there are 22 verses in the first chapter. Now remember, Lamentations is Jeremiah lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. This is very historic in 586 BC. Well, why do you think there are 22 verses in Lamentations 1? Because there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. It so happens the first verse begins with a word that begins with aleph. The next one, beit, gimel, dalet, hey. Okay, so most people don't know, but Lamentations is written in poetry where each of the 22 verses are the Hebrew letters in exact alphabetical order. He chose a word that began with that letter. Okay, chapter 2. There are 22 verses. Why do you think there are 22 verses in chapter 2? Because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. All right, but I want you to notice something that happens. Here's the anomaly. First off, you don't even know that it's written according to the Hebrew alphabet, but a big change happens in chapter 2. I want you to notice this. Again, if you remember what the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th letters are, what do you notice here? The ayin and the pei are reversed. They're not in alphabetical order because the ayin comes before the pei. So the question now comes, if you want to look at the Bible deeper, why is the Hebrew word beginning with the letter pay coming before the Hebrew word, the letter ayin. They are the only two letters that are reversed in this chapter. And the problem is, it's because they speak before they have understanding. This is what is happening with Israel. They're talking and they don't understand. Now in Lamentations 3, there's 66 verses. Why is that? Because there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and what's 22 times 3? And so what did they see? The first 3 verses all begin with a Hebrew word that begins with the Hebrew aleph. The next 3 with the Hebrew word begins with the letter beit. So it's the same pattern. It's an exact alphabetical order like A, B, C. But this time there's 3 verses given to every letter. But guess what happens in chapter 3? When it comes to the corresponding verses, again, the letter pei and the letter ayin are still in the wrong order. So chapter 1 begins like normal. Chapter 2, we're seeing disorder. Chapter 3, the disorder has been multiplied times 3. You following me? And now, Lamentations 4, there's 22 verses. Why do you think that is? There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. But again, the ayin and the pei are still in the wrong order. And then that brings us to the last chapter of Lamentations. And there's 22 verses in Lamentations. And why is that? Because there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. But guess what? This time, it's like Nebuchadnezzar's coming. Everything's destroyed. And now there is no order. It is all chaos. There is no order. So this is telling us, from a standpoint we wouldn't know unless we knew Hebrew, that we see the deterioration and the total chaos taking place in the book of Lamentations. As a matter of fact, Lamentations 2:16, your enemies have opened their mouth against you. Let's see. Micah 2 is where it talks about the law of truth was in his mouth. That's what God wants. It says the priest's lips should keep knowledge. He should seek the Torah at his mouth. Joshua 1:8-9, the book of the Torah, God says, shall not depart out of your mouth. So the mouth, we're created to speak, but we have to speak forth the truth. As a matter of fact, listen to Psalm 33:6. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. God spoke, and the word was created, right? Well, the first letter in the Torah is the letter beit, or B. It's real big. You can see that? That's the letter B, first letter of the Torah. And he created everything by the word of his mouth. Well, what's fascinating, if you look at the letter pei, what is inside the letter pei but the letter beit? And so here, the pei is to speak, and the first letter of God's word is the letter beit coming out of his mouth. As a matter of fact, who can read this? Aleph. All right, let me bring this up. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but here's how you spell Aleph. You can hear an L and the F sound. All right? Okay, so that's how you spell Aleph. Well, guess what? When you look at the word for Aleph, the first 2 letters is El, which is God's name, Elohim, right? Well, we know the letter Pei represents mouth, and so here we see God's mouth. And what is inside it? Bei. And his first word of the Bible is Breshit. So out of God's mouth, and God is one, God is Aleph, we see him speaking. So I'm going to close with this and turn it over here to Sherry. But let's look at Psalm 119, verse 129. If you remember, Psalm 119 is also an acrostic as well, where you have the Hebrew letters. 8 verses are given to every Hebrew letter. And so the first 8 verses all begin with the letter Aleph, a word, and then the next beit. And since there's 22 letters and they're all given 8 verses, that's 176 verses in Psalm 119. But what's interesting is listen to how Pei begins. It says, your testimonies are wonderful, therefore does my soul keep them. The entrance of your words give light. Why do you think the first thing God said was, let there be light? And then it says it gives understanding to the simple. And then it says, I opened my mouth and panted. So here, typically, when you look at Psalm 119, the phrase, the letter also is found somewhere in those 8 verses. Okay, so the last thing is we are created in God's image, and we can create or destroy through our speech. A person hearing one kind word could save someone else's life, or through an unkind word, you could destroy someone else and others. So it's so important that we understand the letter P, which is our mouth. Jerry.
Okay. Bravo. All right, so amazingly, God set up this Hebrew alphabet so that the Ein preceded the Pei, which of course means that we should first see and understand something before we open our mouths. Great idea, isn't it? As Pastor Mark said, this letter makes 2 sounds. It says both P when it has a dot, and it says F as in fly when there is no dot. And there are also 2 forms. So you're going to see this form in front of a word or anywhere in the word unless it's the very last letter, and then this final line at the bottom is going to turn down, and that will be the final form if it's the last letter of a word. So you think, oh, that's so difficult to understand, but think about it. Our English alphabet, all 26 letters have 2 forms, right? We have a capital and a lowercase. There are very few letters, only 5, that have final forms in Hebrew, so much easier, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, so do you remember the other letter that makes 2 sounds? B and V. If it has a dot, it's B. No dot, it's V. But think about our vowels. Just look at A, for instance. A can say A in bat, A in able, or A in banana. So we have lots of letters that make more than 1 sound. So it's really much more simple than English. All right, let's learn how to write the P and the Fe. Are you ready? Really, it's just a 3-sided box, and then we're going to put a little decoration in the middle. So we're going to start with this line, a short line here. We're going to come up to the line, and then we're going to go across, come down, and across again. Easy? Everybody got it? Let's do it again. We're going to do a short line across, come up, across, down, and across. Okay, so what's it going to say if I have a dot in it?
P.
P. Good. And what's it going to say with no dot?
F.
Yes. And what's the final form going to look like? Same exact way you write it. Come across with a short line, come up, across, down, and don't go back across, just go below the line this time. Okay, so that's your final form. All right. So it can be said that there is a bait inside of the P, and I have it written with very straight lines, but some fonts have it very curved. And so if you take the curved form of the font that would be used for P, you would say that the letter is made of a kaf. And the first letter in this word, which is kos, which is a container, a glass or a container. We're going to call it a container. And a yud, that would be the 2 letters that would make up the P. So let's see how that would work. So you would make your little yud here, and you'd come around. It would be slightly more. So there you'd have your P. So what do you learn from that? What do you learn from a container and a yud that can mean the Holy Spirit? You learn that our mouth is a container. P is a container, and it should contain the fruit of the Spirit. So that's something really fun to remember. All right, can you switch gears with me here now? We're going to look at 2 words, both of which say the pronoun I. All right, there are 2 words in Hebrew that say I. The first one is ani. Everybody say it.
Ani.
And the second one is anoki.
Anoki.
Okay, so they both say the pronoun I. When you're talking about pronouns and you say we, how many people are in the pronoun we? More than 1, right? It could be 2, 3, or 5 million. It doesn't matter. We don't know. When you say I, how many people are there?
1.
1. All right, now watch this. If you take, where am I? All right. If you take the word pay, where did I write it? Okay, if you take the letter pay, the gematria is 80. Everybody understands that, right? If you add 1, you get 81. What's the 1 you're adding? It's God, all right? And I'll show you how this works in a minute. So you'd have 80 plus 1 is 81. And now if you take the word anoki, which means I, and you do the gematria of anoki for each letter, guess what you get? 81. So what's God saying here? Why did he use this word, anoki? Listen to this verse in Exodus 3:12. Now, therefore, go, and I, anoki, will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. That's God speaking to Moses. Why did he use the word anoki instead of ani? This is so incredible. Anoki specifically emphasizes the importance of the one to whom God is speaking. He's taken the light off of himself and shining it on the one he's speaking to. It shows the desire to be close to the person to whom God is speaking. Now listen to that verse again and realize that God used the word anoki when he says, now therefore go, he's saying go to Moses, and I, anoki, will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. So God's telling him how close he's going to be to him in his mouth so that he'll know what to say. Isn't that incredible?
Yay.
I loved it. Okay, let's do some reading with this letter. You ready? All right, let's start right here. And I've got red lines in between the words so you know where one ends and one begins. So this has a dot in it, so it's going to say what sound? P with the vowel. And that's the name of the letter that we are looking at. So pay, that's the name of the letter. And here we have a dot above, so what's this going to say? Po. And the hey is silent. Po means here. Okay, the next word we want to look at is a final pay or fey. It's going to say fey. There's no dot. So the aleph is going to say ah, and the fey is going to say f, just like fly. Okay, and that word, so say it in Hebrew, off, and that is nose. All right, and then we're going to have an ayin with a line under it. What's that going to say? Ah, with a final fey, which is going to say off, pronounced the exact same way, but that means to fly or take off.
And it's off.
And it's off. So it even works in English. All right, now we're going to have, this is a dalet. What's dalet say?
D.
D. And with the line underneath it, it says ah, so da and
Doff.
doff, and that says page. Okay? Now we're going to have 3 letters, so we're going to start with the yud with a line under it. It's going to say ya, fa, and that's the word, yafa, and it's beautiful. It means beautiful. Or in the male form, you're going to say ya, fe, and that means handsome. And that is our incredible pay. I hope you loved it.
Now let me say one more thing. The first letter in Hebrew is what? Aleph. So without seeing anything, let's visualize the letter. What is the first letter of Aleph? Aleph. And then you hear the L sound, al. What letter makes the L sound? Lamed. And then the last letter that makes F, Aleph, is the letter what? There it is.
Yay.
Right there. And aluf in Hebrew is an ox. Okay? And that's why, again, they built a golden calf, an ox. That's what represented God, which was the first letter. So look at this. You're already not only reading Hebrew, you're thinking Hebrew. Good job.